Okay, thank you everybody for being here. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Trustees to order today, June 2nd, at 6:33 p.m. We have the roll call, please.
Village President Torpy.
Here.
Trustee Clark. Here. Trustee Collum.
Here.
Trustee Davis Ford.
Here.
Trustee Levison.
Present.
Trustee Rosner.
Here.
Trustee Schnall.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Mr. Lerner.
Present.
Mr. Rother.
Here.
Susan Caljean, present. Adequate notice of this meeting had been provided to the press in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6. In addition, notice of this meeting was posted on the bulletin board at 76 South Orange Avenue and on the village website and has been filed in the office of the village clerk. Official action may be, it says may not be taken, but
Mr. Lewis, this was noticed as action may be taken, correct?
may be taken, right?
Thank you. The sole purpose for convening tonight in the special meeting is to discuss change orders related to asbestos abatement. Mr. Lewis, do you want to give an introduction, then we'll hand it over?
I will. As you're all aware from the memo and from the past, we awarded a contract to Tricon to do the asbestos abatement work. The original contract amount was $194,900. It was an extremely favorable bid, significantly lower than the second lowest bid. They have been proceeding with the work. A few weeks ago, some items were discovered which were brought to the attention of the board, and which were the subject of two earlier change orders. In the last several weeks, some additional conditions have been identified that were not foreseeable and not within the scope of the contract. I summarized those in a memo that I provided to you. These were brought really over the last couple of weeks. Our project engineer reviewed them, ultimately resulted in a meeting held on last Wednesday that went on for about 3 hours, attended by myself, our village engineer, Sal Renda, village counsel, Mr. Rother, the gentleman to the right of me, the first of which is Mitchell Fritz, which I think you all know, but for the public, he's with J. Shapiro and Associates, our project manager for the overall, our construction manager, and Kevin Harity of Hatchmont McDonald, who's the asbestos engineer, as well as representatives from Tricon. At that point, we went through all of their requests for change orders, as outlined in the memo. A number of them were determined to be within the scope of the original contract, but a significant number of them were also ultimately agreed to be unforeseen conditions that we did not know about. After that meeting, the discussion was that we would review things, they would go back, price out, and particularly because the initial estimates had been premised in part on as if you had to do only one standing alone, and if they were going to do some or all of them, would there be some economies of scale. We then met again on Friday, went through a period of negotiation, both as to scope and what was or was not on some of the debatable issues, as well as the amounts originally proposed, ultimately reaching an agreement in principle where we, with the clear understanding that anything would be subject to the approval of the Board of Trustees, but that an agreement that the project team was comfortable in recommending to the board, and that the contractor indicated that they would be willing to accept as additional compensation for the new items. As I outlined in the memo, these changes are significant, and ultimately the total value of them exceed the amount of the original contract. And as reflected in the memo, and as I'm sure will be borne out as we go through them one by one, a lot of this is the product of tearing open a 120-year-old building and finding a lot of things that had transpired over the years that people were not aware of.
You said it could do it.
Oh, that was the feedback on it.
Do you have anything specific, or you just want to begin the conversation?
I got lots of stuff.
Well, I know.
Does anybody want to make a motion to
Working
to
now?
recess?
Not,
Nope, it's
okay.
good. All right.
So the second item, again, the blown installation was denied. In addition, there were the transite panels. The transite panels were determined to have been not foreseeable. They weren't visible. You wouldn't know they were there until the asbestos plaster was removed and not within the scope of the contract. That total is $17,136. The blown installation, so it was denied. Obviously, I didn't have a picture, and I apologize, but I thought we had somewhere in the correspondence a picture of the transite panels, but I was unable to put my hands on it today to put in the slide, and consequently, there's no slide, no picture. Number 3 is the clerk's workstation. This was an item where the specifications called for the clerk's counter to remain and be protected. The intention being the built-in old solid wood that's part of the overall frame and below the window. The contractor interpreted that to include what should have been obvious to anyone was a Formica sort of cabinet and with a counter on top of it that inconceivable why anyone would think we would save that, but they, when told after they sort of wrapped that all up, that had to go so they could get to the plaster behind it. They initially sought a change order. That was denied, and again, since it was denied, I didn't produce, have any pictures of that. The fourth item, so again, that one, the amount requested was $7,238. That was denied. The fourth was basement crawl space. This was a fairly complicated issue, but in layman's terms, older construction called balloon framing had studs that ran all the way from essentially the foundation all the way up to the roof in one contiguous run that had spaces in between. Later, they began using fire stops at each floor level to block off those openings so fire could run up there, and eventually it was replaced with platform framing where you actually have a sill plate at each floor. The assumption, well, I don't think this one was really addressed, or there was particularly an underlying assumption, but what was discovered by the contractor after they were, taking down all the plaster at the second floor level is that this building did not have fire stops, nor did it have platform framing, so that anything that fell behind fell all the way down to the basement. And under the sequencing in the project specifications, the basement was to be cleaned and cleared first, which it was. The contractors sought a pretty considerable extra, $50,061.20, to remove and basically to re-enter the basement, clean it all up, and remove all the asbestos that had fallen, and then clean it. Ultimately, the engineer denied that, finding that that could or should have been something they could have either figured out or tested or done one spot on. But at the same time, we did recognize that there was some room for interpretation, but ultimately that was denied, and that's why there's no pictures of that. The next item is the stairs and stringers, and normally when the stringers, which are the angled pieces that the stair treads and risers are attached to, they're normally affixed directly to the structural members, the studs going up wherever the staircase is going to be. What was discovered here is that essentially the stairways were plastered first, and then the stringers were placed after that and secured to the studs with the fasteners going through initially the stringer, then through the plaster and into the studs. So this first picture shows you sort of the back side of one of the stringers, and you can see where the plaster is, and then it spans between the whole back and the studs. And then the next picture, you can see that's going up the stairs to the left-hand side. Over to the left, you'll see the stud. You'll see the sort of darker board, and then that little white strip. You can see where plaster is sandwiched between the stringer and the studs. This is not conventional construction. It was not foreseen or called for in the specs. The specs did not call for removing the stairs because it was envisioned that the plaster would stop at the top of the stringer, would be cut off, removed there, and cut off below. So the consensus was that This was an unforeseen condition. It was unfortunately found in all 4 staircases. The total for that is $85,196.16. This involves a couple things. One, removing the stairs, which was not envisioned, then removing that plaster. We've also asked in the contractor in order to complete their work, and then it will be left behind. This does include the acquisition of some stair scaffolding that will then remain. We'll essentially own it because the follow-on contractor will not have any stairs to go up and down until the new stairs are installed. And then finally, the one staircase to the basement was planned to be relocated and removed anyway. So part of this includes the removal of that staircase, which, but for this coming up now in the asbestos context, we would have paid the general contractor to remove it. So some component of this would be reflected in less work to be done on the general contract. This was one that we are recommending for inclusion. So with that in mind, does anyone have questions on this specific condition of either the engineer, construction manager, myself, anyone?
Did you state the cost on it?
Yeah, I did, $85,196.16.
And do we know roughly how much of that will come off later on?
We don't, but the downside is, there will be savings by not having the general contractor remove this staircase, but now we have to replace the staircases as part of the general contract. So the net is still not, not a positive.
And where will that be stored, I assume, in the meanwhile?
No, I think the consensus of the architect and everything else was that attempting to remove these in a way that you could store them, it'd be cheaper to just put in new stringers and new stairs when they put them back. Okay, the next item was tongue and groove both in ceilings and walls. As I summarized in the memo, generally when you'd have structural members, whether they be the floor, the floor joists above, which are basically the ceiling in a room, and then the studs on the walls, you would normally, they'd apply wood lath to that. They would affix wire mesh to that. They would apply the plaster. What was discovered in, and that was the case in a lot of this building, but there were certain areas where, and this first picture is an example of where they went to open a ceiling, and you'll see all the hardwood tongue and groove, paneling, for lack of a better word, that was up there that was not called for in the specs, not foreseeable and not known. And then similarly, the next picture, this is a cutaway where you can see on some of the walls beneath it, this actually looks to be stained and finished tongue and groove paneling that it would appear that at some point they actually have that was the wall surface and then later plastered over it. The impact of this on the contractor, of this not being included, was twofold. One, those wood surfaces, having had the plaster, asbestos plaster applied to them, are now contaminated and need to be removed. And in addition, in the case of both the ceiling component, there's debris trapped above it, and in the walls there's debris, including asbestos-containing debris behind it. The only way to access that is to remove the wood. So the consensus was that was not foreseeable, not a known condition. You wouldn't know it until you started ripping away the plaster and found out that however many years ago they decided to plaster over their paneling. The total on that is $50,839.60. Given that this condition was now found to exist, even if the wood was not asbestos contaminated and/or could be cleaned, in the main contract they would have removed this anyway because there are new floor and ceiling surfaces that are going to be put in. So it was not a known condition, but we were going to pay to remove it, whether by this contractor or the next. So any questions on this specific condition? Okay, next is, you'll all recall, as will I'm sure a lot of the public, in our main meeting room in Village Hall, there was above the dais where the governing body sat, an arched, lower, sort of separate arched ceiling that was lower than the larger arched ceiling in the whole room. But that was all plastered in, all the way matching up to the ceiling. And when they removed it, what they found was above that, and this picture was the best one I could find that shows that there was a whole second plastered ceiling above that, all of which contained asbestos and will have to be removed. It was not known that when you pulled all that away, behind and above it, there was going to be this additional plastered section, and it, obviously it's plaster, but it's also plaster that's 20, 25, 30 feet high and around other framing members, so it's a challenge to remove. That total was $17,875.76. Again, the entire team, the engineer, architect, everybody agreed that nobody knew it was up there. Couldn't have known it was up there until you started ripping away the plaster in front of the dais. Any questions on that specific condition? Okay, number 8. I think as you're all aware, there was an elevator, or it's actually a lift, a Lula, smaller scale type elevator that was obviously installed after the construction of the building because it's mechanical. It didn't exist at the time. When it was put in, it was housed or framed in a sheetrock sort of enclosure, and what was testable and visible and whatever was assumed that it was sheetrocked. When they got into it further, and particularly accessing from the rooms on the other side, it became apparent that this had been built into a corner where there were still some older plaster-containing walls behind the sheetrock that had been used to create the elevator shaft, so that plaster behind there has to get removed. The only way to remove it is to remove the elevator. This was not known, was not contained within the project specifications. The total on that's $21,000. This is another area where that elevator, how much of this is asbestos removal and how much is removing the elevator. I don't have that number handy, but we would have been paying somebody to remove the elevator because that was going to come out as part of the overall project and be replaced and actually relocated with a more conventional elevator and be in a different location. So any questions on that specific?
Yeah, just a quick one. Is it known whether, so the sheetrock obviously is newer, but that plaster, is it from the same time of the original?
Yeah,
So-
what it appears is they built the elevator enclosure into a corner so that the two back walls were part of the older plaster walls, and then they framed out this elevator enclosure.
So it wouldn't be necessary to test that. Was all the plaster tested? So for instance, to see if that was contaminated, or it would just, one would assume that all plaster in the building is?
We basically tested plaster throughout the building, and the majority of it was coming up positive, well, very low, but it was greater than the regulatory limit.
And so one would think, again, regardless of wherever it is in the building, if you find plaster, and if it was of the same time, it would have been the same. Did you find that the levels were, even though if it was low, it was the same, pretty much?
They were pretty much the same, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next item is, and as I described, most of you will recall in Village Hall, when you were in the main foyer, if you turned to go up the main staircase, there was a couple steps up to a landing, and then you continued up, you made a right, and you went up the stairs to the main meeting room, or you could continue straight ahead at that sort of elevated level. There was a little alcove that had our postage machine and some mailing stuff, and then beyond that was a door that was a supply closet, more than a closet, it was a room. In the course of the demolition of and taking the asbestos off the walls, it was determined that that elevated portion appeared to have been built at some later date after the original construction, and beneath the subfloor there was debris from apparently when they built it, and whatever they tore apart, they just left it underneath, but also then the plaster that extended below it. So the only way to abate that was to remove the subfloor, and then they also now, with all the plaster and stuff that had come down, any of the debris that came in there became contaminated, so that debris had to get removed, as well as the plaster all the way down to the original floor level. In addition, when they pulled off the plaster in the walls, there had been a bump out, and what was discovered was a pipe chase, which is essentially an area, almost like an empty elevator shaft that's left to have pipes, wires, or anything run between floors. That had, and as you can see from the picture, that's from the sort of the back side of it, but it had plaster on the inside that was not known to exist, and that needs to be removed as well. So total on those two items was $22,000. Any questions on that specific item? Okay, and then lastly, I identified, although I don't have pictures of, and this was, it had not, I think, risen to the level of a formal submission, but the contractor was, when they were getting down to the finish, it was determined that virtually all the plaster in a lot of the areas behind the door and window trim, rather than if it was just, if it was using wood lath, or rather than the wire mesh, it may have just pulled out from behind the trim. The trim extends over the wall. And what was discovered was that the wire mesh was put down, and then the trim went later, and the trim and the fasteners and nails securing the trim went through the wire mesh, so that if you cut away, you couldn't just pull the plaster from behind the trim. It was an issue that was likely debatable under the contract. Eventually, the contractor just agreed to do it, with the only caveat is they're going to remove, most of this trim is historic, and the intention is to keep it, so they've agreed to remove it as gingerly and as gently as possible to allow for the removal of all this asbestos, with the only caveat being that we're not going to hold them accountable if some of the trim breaks. So we thought that was a fair compromise. We thought it was a sign of good faith on their part to sort of give up that point and, seeking compensation, agree to do it.
Wouldn't the trim be contaminated?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Wouldn't the trim be contaminated and have to be
Well, the trim itself they can clean. They'll take it and they'll clean it, because it was applied after.
So that's part of what they will be doing?
Yeah.
And again, is that stored back in the building or on an offsite?
Yeah, the trim, any trim that's removed and cleaned it'll likely be stored. I don't think we've worked that out, but it'll be wrapped, bagged, whatever, and stored likely. They were storing some of it already, some of the doors and stuff back in the building department, the newer wing that didn't have asbestos, and that it's not really going to be touched too much in the main contract. So my expectation is that it would be stored there as well.
And they agreed to note where it came from so that it could
It'll all be
put back in the
documented.
same place.
Right, and worked with the architect, and the architect gave specific instructions on how they'd like it done and cataloged. And so that's sort of the item-by-item analysis of the conditions that were found. I then got into the summary, and I think, and we'll get into the numbers in a minute, but there was two things. I think one, obviously, anytime you get changes, it's disappointing. At the same time, you'd be naive to think you could open up a 120-year-old building and not get some surprises. So the one benefit by bifurcating this process and doing the asbestos work separate under this separate contract is that we, generally believe, and I think the professionals all agree, that we've now essentially exposed the entire building, and whatever surprises there were going to be, we've found them. So at least that's out of the way. I think that will make for it will allow the architect certainly to have a complete and very thorough knowledge of where he's at in finalizing the overall specifications. The pre-qualified general contractors, we're going through that process now, will have the opportunity in a pre-bid inspection to really see what they're getting into. Hopefully that elimination of the potential contingencies and surprises will lead to more competitive bids, will allow for some very informed bids, and ideally, and I think the expectation is, reduce the likelihood of change orders on the prime contract. As noted, there were a couple of these items that would either be just because they were there and we knew they were there, would have had to been done, and/or once we discovered them, they would have to be done, whether by this contractor or the prime contract, and that would be, again, the tongue and groove wood. We didn't know it was there. If it wasn't contaminated and this contractor didn't have to remove it, then we'd pay the general contractor to remove it, because it has to come out regardless. Similarly, the elevator was going to get it removed by somebody. We were going to have to pay for it. The one staircase was going to get removed, and again, the removal of the others is going to require the replacement, so that is probably more than offset any savings by not paying them to remove it. So in summary, the total, and I think the other thing that's important, and I think the project team did a very good job of, I think, weighing and sort of balancing the pros and cons and everything, and being very pragmatic. And I certainly invite both Mr. Fritz and Mr. Harity to weigh in is, in my experience as well, in construction projects in general, much less historic ones, when you run into issues like this, decisiveness, expeditious, reasonable action, reaching fair agreements to get the project going and keep it moving has an incredible value. I think certainly the village learned some lessons in the firehouse project about indecisiveness, sort of quarreling over certain items. At the end of the day, you wound up arguing, the amount you were arguing over was less than what it cost you to argue for it in terms of attorney's fees, in terms of delays, in terms of time. Obviously, in this project, time is money. We're paying rent to rent places, so every month of delay is another month of rent. Every additional delay, ultimately, at the end, there will be additional time by the professionals, which comes with a cost, additional time by village staff, which comes with a cost. So I was, on a personal level, I was pleased. I would recognize Tricon. We, I think, all went in with a great deal of apprehension because it was such a favorable base bid. Again, the reminder, it was $194,000. The next closest one, I think, was $371,000. So essentially, they left $180,000 on the table. And those bids, everybody agrees that these conditions were not known, and that no matter who we gave the contract to, they would have been at the same table saying, this is a change order, we didn't know about it, and they would have had every bit as much right to say so. So, when we approached this, I'd recognize, I think, the project team for their, I think, very good, logical, balanced approach. Nobody went into it, with an adversarial, and we're going to dig our heels in, and that's when you get in trouble, and that's when it costs you a lot of time and a lot of money. And to Tricon's credit, I think they came in good faith. They gave in on some of their claims relatively quickly and just were willing to do the work and get it done. We're looking for fair compensation. We believe that, within what they were asking for, I think ultimately when you add up all the change orders versus what we're recommending, it's about $80,000 less than what they initially asked for. Just so you know that the team, I think, did a good job, the professionals in questioning the amounts, the number of hours, the man days, et cetera, in bringing that number down and reached a number. So, ultimately, and for the public, at the end of the day, what we're recommending that the grand total of all the change orders is $232,561.60. That includes the first two, the stair, which we had broached and sort of tentatively approved, but didn't go through the formal process. In context, obviously that seems like a lot because it's more than the original contract amount, but I did put up, and it's in the memo, and I'll put it up on the screen here. I think it's important to remember, you obviously, you get very excited when you get a low bid and you're already counting your savings, but when you look at the original engineer's pre-bid estimate was $616,680. The average, we did receive 13 bids. The average of all those 13 bids was $495,820, and the next lowest bid, so if we had not accepted Tricon, our starting point would have been $371,500. And again, the consensus is that these conditions were unforeseen, unforeseeable, and any contractor that took the job would have been seeking compensation, and we believe that they would have been seeking at least this much, if not more. So if you add the same amount of change orders to those contracts, you can see what it does, whereas compared to the revised total for Tricon would be $428,091.60. Under any of the other scenarios, the second lowest bidder, if they got the exact same change amount, they'd be at $604,061.60. The average of three bids would have been $728, and the engineer's estimate would have been $849,241.60. So, is it disappointing that you wind up having to spend more? Yes. If you told me, 8 months ago, before we ever went out to bid, somebody walked up and said, would you do the complete asbestos for this much money, all in, no surprise, no guaranteed, I certainly would have strongly recommended it and jumped on it. So, the prism of hindsight and look and say, oh, well, we had it for $194. I think that, that's our recommendation. There is a process because this obviously greatly exceeds 20% threshold. The state law generally does not favor nor permit change orders that exceed 20%, except under certain circumstances. And the two real criteria for that, I think this is almost like a model case for it, and certainly Mr. Rother can opine on that as well from a legal standard, are that, one, the condition was unforeseeable and unknown. And again, here you had a 120-year-old building, and all these things were all covered up by asbestos plaster that you couldn't just start cutting open to see what's back there. And then the second is that it would not be practical under all the circumstances to simply, okay, we'll stop this and we'll go out to bid and award another one. And, here we're in a contained negative air pressure, DEP regulated, permitted, asbestos containment environment, and the prospect of sort of shutting that all down, then going out to bid for somebody else to come in and do this work, would cost a lot more time, and I'm convinced cost substantially more, because now you'd add new mobilization, new permits, new equipment, new everything. It would cost substantially more. So I think it's, an ideal. It fits exactly under the criteria in the statute when they do permit this. Again, I'm sure Mr. Rother can weigh in as well. But overall, that's the recommendation. Again, Mr. Harity and Mr. Fritz are here to answer any of the the asbestos technical questions, and I'm sure Mr. Rother would be happy to weigh in terms of the statutory procedures, certainly his experience with construction projects, change orders, the value of just cutting a deal. Because, at the end of the day, the conditions are what they are. We can't point anywhere in the spec that would anywhere reasonably suggest that the bidder should have known about it. We didn't know about it. And essentially you have three options. You either reach an amicable agreement with the contractor, which is what we're proposing here. You get the work done relatively quickly and you move on. Alternatively, we dig our heels in. We don't like their amount. We think some of it's covered by the contract. They disagree. We end up in arbitration. We spend a ton of money. We spend another year screwing around with it, and everything, we continue to pay rent, and pretty soon we've spent a lot more than this. Or the third, which is the least tenable and the most, would be the most ludicrous, would be to shut this down, have them leave, go out to bid for a whole new contract. Again, you'd add enormous amounts of time and spend a heck of a lot more money. So, it's...
Barry?
Yes.
I want to commend you for giving us a thorough explanation with documentation and slides. With all of that said, the increase is so substantial that my reservation about agreeing to this,
Is
which
your mic on?
I said, okay, I'll start all over. I just want to commend you on a very informative and thorough presentation with the appropriate pictures and documentations, and the liabilities from your perspective of not moving forward and the options that we have. I just am taken back, though, at the significant increase, and you, again, explain why. And so my affirmative vote will be contingent upon hearing assurances that there will be no more change orders, that every possible surprise has been identified. And if I can get the assurances, because this is over 100 and...
More than that.
115% or...
233.
Well, from a percentage standpoint?
Yeah.
It's 115, 140, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, over 100 and something percent increase, that and I need to be assured that this is it.
Well, I think, and certainly as it relates to the asbestos abatement, we had that conversation. The consensus is that they've exposed everything there is to expose, and there's nothing else, that once this is all done, there won't be an asbestos left in the building. So I think that's pretty safe to say on this. On the general contract, the belief is that in this fully exposed state, with the architect having the ability to do that, to fully, see everything that's there, that there is little, certainly, there are always, discretionary owner-initiated change orders, in the main project. We changed our mind, we'd like to make this room nicer, switch this wall, any of those things. But that's certainly within, your purview in terms of whether we make that decision. But no, I think that the consensus is that this is going to be the resolution of everything on this asbestos contract.
I do have a question about the follow-on contract with the general contractor. That in essence or will Tricon be warranting that there is no more asbestos in the building when they're finished? Or if when the general contractor goes back and it starts his work and he finds some contamination, I would assume that the work would have to stop. Would Tricon be responsible for going back and doing the cleanup?
Is there some sort of indemnification that we can have from that?
I think Mr. Harity could explain how and when they get cleared, and what's the process in terms of testing and...
Once Tricon has come to the point where they feel they have removed all the material and have done a cleanup, we will come in and do another visual inspection of the area to make sure that they have in fact removed all that material that's been identified. We also do final air sampling within the building to make sure that the levels are at acceptable ones for reoccupancy. If there's still asbestos in the building, whether even just a little bit of debris here or there or somewhere, or a major amount, that would cause those samples to come back elevated, and then they would have to go back and find that source and clean it.
That's an answer to a different question. The question I have is that if the contractor, when doing the work that to renovate the building, he finds asbestos.
Well, if he finds asbestos, then no, Tricon would not be held liable.
But I mean, unless I'm mistaken, I think, and you maybe saw from some of the pictures, I've certainly seen more of the pictures, basically all that's left there is wood. It's like one big open area of 2x4s.
Yeah.
And is there anywhere you think there could possibly be any asbestos? That what's left
Not
in there?
anymore, no.
Well, you're going to be looking in all the nooks and crannies when,
Yes, we will.
when he comes to a final inspection, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, see, your answer troubles me, because if you complete the project and you certify through your inspection, because that's the whole reason why you're there, and air sampling, that all levels are acceptable, there should be no asbestos in the environment. And so the question was, if perchance in the construction that the general contractor discovers it because we've moved forward based on your certification that everything is in compliance and they stumble upon it, wouldn't you be responsible without any additional cost to remedy that situation? Because that's the whole reason why you're there.
Are you asking if the contractor should be responsible or the person certifying it?
The person certifying.
Okay.
I mean, that's the whole purpose, the
That is the
reason why
purpose,
you're there.
and I don't know where they would find more material, because we're basically going to have a skeleton of an interior of a building.
And that's absolutely wonderful. But if they do find it, because their whole purpose there is to remedy that situation, would you be responsible for remedying that situation?
I would probably be more responsible than the contractor is.
The contractor shouldn't be responsible because they're not the asbestos removal company. You are. So
Well, he's not.
No,
you're
No.
not?
No.
Okay,
no, I'm not from Tricon.
okay.
I'm the consultant for the asbestos to
He's our engineer.
engineer overlook.
No, I'm meaning Tricon, not you. Tricon, the company that's there to do the asbestos removal. I'm just piggybacking on what Trustee Levinson said. And I think that's a legitimate concern and question.
Once we release the contractor, there's a final inspection, and he's released. And if perchance some material was found, he would not be liable. If there was a negligent supervision and asbestos that should have been found wasn't found, our engineer might be liable.
I see.
But if something is found, we would have to stop work.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
and
then
that's the
remediate.
reason, yes, and that's the reason that we have made the decision to get all of it out. There was a decision made, can we live with some of this sandwiched between wood? And we came to the conclusion that it had been disturbed and we were taking too big a risk to allow the follow-on contractor to come in and begin pounding on studs and create dust from what we had left sandwiched between wood. So we said, we're gonna go the full route, take everything out. Take the stairs out so that we can get to the hidden material and do everything possible to bring a totally asbestos-free building to the follow-on contractor.
Will the building be monitored during the construction phase for asbestos?
No, it would not be.
And just, the only thing we have like 4 minutes before the planning board is supposed to be coming on, and I feel like there's like 100 more questions that some of us probably want to ask. And yet, we're under a gun to get this done tonight. And I'm not quite sure how this is going to happen. I got the sense that some people definitely don't want to vote on it until they ask all the questions, and yet we can't hold up a planning board meeting. So I just want to hear how we're addressing that. So, unless I'm wrong. And
Do we have more questions? I mean,
I don't know.
or are we
Is there any more
ready to make a
questions?
motion?
Oh, I could probably go for another 2 hours, so,
That's my concern.
but
here,
I'm
so.
voting, where I'm voting anyway, so.
No, I don't
You might
worry
want to
about
poll the board and see if you can actually take action tonight, or if you
The
want another
question is,
meeting.
if we vote on this now, I still want to reserve the right to ask some of these questions at another meeting and have stuff. I think that we all have the general feeling that we have to do this, but I still think that we want to have some of these questions answered, and that this discussion, even though we may vote on it, is not a closed discussion in terms of how we're moving forward and with everybody.
All right, I have one.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. I have one quick question, though, that if we could answer that now. And that question is, how much time is this going to add to the project?
Starting from tomorrow, the change order adds 28 days, correct?
Wednesday.
Well, starting from
starts
Wednesday,
yeah.
because we'll have to notify
So by
them
the end of
tomorrow.
June,
that
it's going to be
approved.
done. Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
First of July.
July 1st is the
How
end
how did
date.
you determine that timeline? Because our abatement work, just to recap, was originally going to be April 25th. We're now at June 2nd. So I would rather add a couple more weeks if need be, rather than set another unfair expectation on when this is going to be done.
Barry, should I?
Yeah, please.
So, the original duration for the asbestos was contractually supposed to be 60 days. And then upon starting, there were issues in getting started, electrical power, the winter, so on and so forth. And then we got to where we started in March. There was a logistical $0 time extension change order that was issued, change order number 1, that refreshed the time so that when they started again anew this spring, they had 60 days. And there was change order, then there was a change order for, we added time with change order, 2 of the change orders that you have heard about today, but which predate these 4 or 5 high-dollar issues, that both came with time. Now, when we give the contractor time, I don't voluntarily give him what we arbitrarily think. The contractor asks for a certain amount of time. So in each case, in considering their change order proposals, we've also considered the amount of time that they've asked for. So all of the time that we're giving them is time that they asked for. Plus, the first 2 individual change orders, one was for the transite panels and one was for the tower stair paneling. Upon fully executing those 2 change orders, that brought the contractor to May 16th. These other issues that arose didn't all arise in one fell swoop. It took some time as they became revealed, as the building doesn't come apart very fast. It comes apart in slow bits and pieces. There was some lost time mixed in. Right now, the contract would have been to May 16th. The contractor asked for 28 calendar days to do the work from the day that they would first be allowed to do the work. Provided the board acted affirmatively, that would have been Wednesday. So we also, in our conversations and in the meetings last week, Wednesday and Friday, we agreed that there would be an administrative period of time to get them from May 16th to the first day that they can start work, so that they're covered by contract time all the way to July 1st. But in terms of the duration of the work, those were days that the contractor asked for and we didn't see any reason to give them more time than they asked for.
And you're confident that 28 days?
Well, they're the ones who are expressing the confidence, and it was suggested that they under-promise and over-perform, and to make sure that they asked for enough time. We did question them about it on Friday. They were confident and reaffirmed their confidence in the days, and now it's up to them to meet that schedule.
And not only that, but Mitch was very careful to ask, does that mean we're going to see the taillights on that date?
Right, so-
We're not going to an inspection at that point. That means it's over.
Your response was satisfactory. I just want to hit one more before it's 7:30.
Sure thing.
Mr. Rother, to the statutory requirements regarding change orders, what is this process with the state right now? And also, is what this board is considering consistent with our
We
local
don't-
ordinances?
We don't have to do anything with regard to the state. We need a certification from the contractor, we need a certification from our engineer, and that ends it.
And there is no check from the state?
No,
And
nope.
Well, we do each year, as part of our budget, fill out one of the budget sheets is to identify any contracts that had change orders that exceeded 20%.
That's after the fact.
So that would be in next year's budget, at which time the state can review it. They can ask for backup documents, sort of effectively audit you. They don't approve it ahead of time. They just want to know about it and make sure that you properly follow the statutory procedures.
And the 2A, is this consistent with our local ordinances, this change order?
There are no local ordinances that would affect this that I'm aware
Okay.
of.
And then just finally, to Trustee Rosner's point, certainly, well, obviously, I'm there at every meeting anyway, but I'm confident that Mr. Harity and Mr. Fritz, subject to their schedules, we can bring them back, have another sort of postmortem, answer all the questions, what happened, where are we going from here, and certainly.
It would probably make sense to bring them back at the June 23rd meeting, a few days before the work is supposed to be. A few days before the work is supposed to be finished, so if we can have them at the
Have a
June
status,
23rd meeting.
sure.
And then if we have to put them on early, put them on, then we can finish up the questions that we have.
Sounds good.
So, Mr. Lewis, what do you, if
I did-
trustees are comfortable moving forward?
Yeah,
what do
if
you
you're
need?
comfortable, I did put at each of your spots, it's technically 3 separate resolutions, just so that the paperwork matches up. The first is, they're unnumbered, but the first is resolution authorizing change order number 3 for Tricon Enterprises, Inc. for construction services, a project known as asbestos abatement and disposal at South Orange Village Hall, representing a net increase of $10,425.60 to the original contract. That was for the wood paneling in the tower stair. Second is resolution authorizing change order number 4 for Tricon Enterprises, Inc. for construction services with a project known as asbestos abatement and disposal at South Orange Village Hall, representing a net increase of $17,136. That was for the additional transite panels. And then the large one, which is all the items that we went through this evening, resolution authorizing change order number 5 for Tricon Enterprises, Inc. for construction services for the project known as asbestos abatement and disposal at South Orange Village Hall, representing a net increase of $205,000 to the original contract amount. So it would be those 3 resolutions.
Can we treat them as one in a vote? Or do
Yeah, we can.
So I move that we do accept these change orders as
Can I just ask one small question before? Is there also an impact on the professional services as a result of this extension and timeline and overseeing the asbestos work?
I think there will be, obviously, specifically on this, there would be an impact, I think, with Hatchmont McDonald in their time, because obviously there will be some oversight of this work. I have gotten some information from Mr. Harity that we're reviewing, and then we'll bring that to the board. Mr. Fritz is sort of part of a larger contract that was to span the whole project, so we will definitely be, I think, looking at that, because obviously the project has become prolonged. His isn't, specifically tied just to these change orders, but more the overall project duration. This particular impact, these changes, I don't know that would have much, if any, impact on the architectural contract, although that would also potentially have changes related to the overall duration of the project.
That's a good point. So would you also, for the next meeting or by the
We'll-
next
we'll be
meeting, have
pulling that
those
together.
numbers also?
We will.
So with all those following conditions, trustee Schnall has moved the 3 resolutions,
Second.
seconded by trustee Levison. We have a roll, please.
Trustee Clark?
Yes.
Trustee Column?
No.
Trustee Davis Ward?
Yes.
Trustee Levinson?
Yes.
Trustee Rosner?
Yes.
Trustee Schnall?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, before we do leave, I just need to ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak at this time. I assume none of the planning board members want to delay the start of their meeting. Maybe they do. Seeing as there are no members of the public that wish to speak, and no other business, I have a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.